What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Sound Money Podcast. I am your host, Steve McGarry, and today I'm going to be talking about the future of work. Now, I've mentioned the gig economy multiple times on the past pods, but it is a very interesting topic, and I wanted to dive into some of the data around it. Now, today is an interesting day. It's the day after the presidential or Democratic candidate debate that was really interesting. Followed a lot of Andrew Yang's statements, and a lot of kind of a groundswell happened under many different bickerings that were going back and forth. But I want to talk about that on a different podcast. I know a lot of you guys have been asking me, DMing me about that, but more so I'm interested in discussing the future of work because it's completely related to topics that were discussed. And I'm very interested in how things are going to end up over the next decade that is starting in the coming week here. And at the time of recording this, the end of 2019, it's almost 2020. And we're all very excited for what is coming. Now, in terms of the gig economy and 1099, as a rule of thumb, 1099 means that you're an independent contractor. You are independent and you are responsible for paying your income taxes, your federal taxes, all of your taxes on your own. And as an FTE or full-time employee, usually your taxes are withdrawn from a paycheck that you're receiving from an employer, and you have a W-2, which is the tax form that is filled out. So 1099 is a tax form for an independent contractor usually, and the W-2 is full-time employee. That's just a quick overview of the two different things that we're going to be talking about. Now, the reason that this came up so much is California just passed Assembly Bill 5, and this means that it's going to be effective in January, and businesses will automatically have to reclassify hundreds of thousands of independent contractors as employees. That's kind of the intention of this goal, or the intention of this bill. And one of the things that is interesting about this bill is the conversation is now coming up about why do people choose to be independent contractors, freelancers, things like that. And the data behind this is quite staggering, actually. So when you look at it, on the face of it, a lot of people think like, okay, well, independent contractors, for some reason, they couldn't become full-time employees, so they had to become freelancers or independent contractors. And that couldn't be further from the truth based on data. So 86% of professional freelancers choose freelancing over W-2. 86%. 35% of the U.S. workforce, 55 million people as of 2016 and 2017. It's around 45% now, is projected close to 50% in 2019, between 40 and 50% in 2019. So about 55 million people as of 2016 and approaching 70 million coming into 2020 is what the projections are. And 15.8% of workers in 2016 were engaged in alternative work arrangements. So like your on-call, your contract, your independent contractors, your freelancers, your temp agencies, all of these different types of alternative work arrangements. And 19.8% of full-time independents earn more than $100,000 per year. So almost 20%. I would assume this number is a little out of date. This is from last year. So they are effectively saying a quarter of the people that are independent contractors or independent 1099ers earn more than 100K. By 2027, more than half of American workers, 58%, will have some experience as independent contractors. So part of the rationale, real quick, to obviously we can now see a little bit of formation around why people are independent contractors. Like there's people choosing, 86% are choosing that. And also on the flip side, why do businesses want independent contractors? And part of the rationale here is they don't have to increase their labor their labor costs. So one of the numbers that not many people discuss that I was digging around, and I'll put all the links to my information and statistics below. I'm getting a lot of this from the IRS, Los Angeles Times, and the Nation 1099 publication here. And a lot of the rationale behind the businesses being involved is they don't want to increase the amount that they are paying for employees. And this plays into some of the things that Andrew Yang has mentioned multiple times, is that the incentives are not aligned with businesses with the current workforce. People aren't getting health benefits that are 1099s. They have to pay their own way, $500-$600 a month. And it's a very difficult game when you're balancing between, do I go independent, work with multiple businesses and extend and uncap my earnings, or do I work with one business and make it easy and get health insurance paid for out of the business's pocket, and I'm making contributions towards everything every month. And this is the constant chasm between the two that is brought up a lot on the Yang platform, and Bernie Sanders has brought this up many times as well, because the workforce is just bulging in the direction. It's just a constant growth of independent contractors every year. And part of that's because the internet is decentralizing a lot of this. Everybody's able to start their own LLC and work with multiple companies all at once. And a great example of this, I looked this up from the Los Angeles Times, is a quick story here. So Estrada is a 40-year-old guy, and he's based in California. And he is an independent contractor and businessman. And he works for a San Pedro trucker. So San Pedro, I guess as an independent, he would be just an independent contractor in San Pedro, which is in Los Angeles, and an owner-operator. So he is netting $6,000 a month and pays his $3,500 a month mortgage. And the employee trucking jobs, and this is as an independent contractor, employee trucking jobs only pay $29 an hour. So since he shifted into starting an LLC, being an independent contractor, and setting up his own permits, his own insurance, he's now netting a multiple of what he was earning before. And he's in full control. He can work with multiple different logistics companies because he has his own independence set. And it's a really interesting concept where his earnings bump up because he's absorbing that risk and he's taking that amount of work on. And that is one of the positive ways of looking at this. I think it's this law that's being passed in California is a good example of how it's going to push different independent contractors, and they're going to be able to work with pretty much any company. And it's gonna really empower some contractors, but there are going to be some rough times here where basically I think, for example, journalists, many of them are 1099s. They're going to be pushed out of their W-2 positions, their full-time positions, into contract positions, or it's just going to be mass layoffs, potentially, of just cutting contractors off. There's going to be some rocky roads ahead of us because people are figuring the system out. They're going to be figuring how to work all of these different angles here on this law that's being passed. And this is great that California passed this, because it's an example of just a progression into the future. People are thinking about this and they are kind of taking action. And I'm a firm believer in, it's not going to be perfect right out of the gate, but we need to do something with automation and things like that popping up every day, taking jobs, and people are moving into design and creative work and more independent contractor roles. So we need to adjust. We can't just keep this old archaic structure. It just won't last. It will not last, guaranteed there. So One of them, one of the interviews here, also from the LA Times, was with a business owner. And if I pay minimum wage, health insurance, paid 6 days overtime, I'm adding 30% to my labor costs. I have to get session players, pay someone to do my marketing, make a music video, do a tour. How am I supposed to pay employment taxes on all that? It doesn't make sense. So from the business perspective, they do not want to increase their labor costs, and that is where we see this big chasm that I was talking about. So there needs to be a restructure of how all of these things happen. I think that California is kind of the first one to raise their hand and say, hey, this needs to be part of the discussion. Here's a bill that we're putting forward as like the guinea pig to test this out. And we know that it's an issue. We know what's going on. And everybody should pay attention to the growing gig economy. It's going to be more than half of the workforce. Easily more than half, like 57%, I believe, was what the figure was by 2027, which is a huge amount of people. I mean, that's approaching 100. That's approaching a lot. I didn't want to misquote there. Let's look up how big the workforce is exactly, according to the IRS. And let's see, 160 million persons in January 2018. So the labor force. All right. So about half of that is looking at about 80 million people. And a little bit more than half of that could be 90 million by 2027. And that's not sustainable with the current model that exists. It's just that will not hold. That will not hold at all. So 81% of working parents say work-life balance is more important than pay when looking for a new job. 70% have thought about leaving a job because it doesn't offer flexibility. 32% of workers have changed jobs in the last 2 years. 50% of U.S. jobs are compatible with remote work arrangements, and 80% of the workforce says they would like to work remotely at least part-time. 74% of North American office workers say that they would quit their jobs and another allows them to work remotely. So they would literally jump if another one started offering a remote job. Among millennials, 69% wish they had chosen a job with better work-life balance, and 44% wish they would have chosen a job they enjoyed more. 44% of business leaders say the top socioeconomic driver of change in an industry is the changing nature of work, flexible work. And that's from the World Economic Forum. I'm impressed by the fact that it's not a bigger conversation that we're talking about. I love that Andrew Yang brings this up regularly and says that we need something like a UBI to support people in these transitional phases, because people do need to shift. And the average freelancer and independent contractor is reaching their goal within 2 years of financial stability. They are reaching their financial goals. And as I said before, almost 20% are making over 6 figures, which, I mean, in my opinion, after taxes, that's a no-brainer. I think that there's a lot of people that do fear the risk of being self-employed and things like that. But if you're weighing up the risk versus, doing something you don't like versus something that you like, it's a dangerous game, choosing something that you don't like and wasting time on that. So the total working age population, I think this is for independent workforce, is larger than government statistics. Percent of working age population, 68 million engaged in independent work. Okay, so we're coming up on 70 million. And that, to me, is a pretty substantial number, and it should not be ignored. That's why I'm excited that it's being brought up. And I just wanted to throw some facts at you guys just to let you know that the future of work is going to be something along the lines of remote work. It is going to be something along the lines of like quarterly meetings in centralized areas. I saw Jason Calacanis, the owner of Launch, and a very well-known angel investor in Silicon Valley. He was actually talking about this, like different hacks that he's seen where people are moving on the outskirts of cities. Like San Francisco is just pretty much unsustainable in terms of people buying homes and living and working for startups there. And they're moving 2-3 hours out, working remotely, and then when they need to come in for a meeting, it's very easy for them to do, whether it's Salt Lake City, Reno, all these outskirt cities around the cities. It's a very interesting proposal. I've seen more so around these retreats being a popular destination for remote workers, where a conference is going on and everybody flies in and meets up. But it's with the day and age where we are with technology where it is and the ability to work from anywhere at its peak, I'm really impressed that we haven't put a little bit more thought as a country into how this is going to unfold. I'm impressed by that. I think that the self-employed concept is going to explode into a whole new world once we have all of these trucking jobs automated, once we have all of these automated jobs pushing people into the gig economy and the self-employment economy. It's just such a huge gap that we're going to see. So I think it's going to be a really bizarre time over the next 5-10 years. And if you guys are interested in learning more about this concept, the links will be in the description below on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, and if you are listening in on Spotify or or iTunes. Thank you so much for listening in. If you guys are new here, please subscribe. And I will see you guys on the next episode of the Sound Money Podcast. Also, leave your comments in the description or in the comment section below, just so I can get a feel for if you guys are interested in more data-driven economic information like this. I love doing it. I love talking about issues like this, and they are very important to me as well as all of the audience out there. So thanks so much for listening in, guys, and I will see you on the next episode of the Sound Money Podcast.